I'm Dan Gibson, and this is another question and answer video. Today's question comes from Munir, but I've received similar questions and comments from many people who ask about the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. While I have addressed this topic in other videos, I'd like to do a dedicated video on this topic so people can easily find it. So today's question is simply, what about the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem? In the Qibla tool, we show the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem as being oriented towards Petra. This means that the Qibla is within 3 degrees of facing Petra in Jordan, and more than 12 degrees from facing Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So I've classified it as facing Petra, as that seems to be much closer. But what's more interesting is that the Quran talks about Al-Aqsa as being a mosque almost 100 years before it was built in Jerusalem. This has caused some problems and a lot of discussion because the Quran and other early Islamic literature seems to assume that Al-Aqsa as a mosque was in existence during the lifetime of Muhammad. So it seems that there were 2 different places that were known as Al-Aqsa. Let's review what the sources say about Al-Aqsa. The Quran names Al-Aqsa in Surah Al-Isra, "Glory to Allah who did take his servant for a journey by night from Masjid al-Haram to Al-Aqsa, whose precincts we did bless in order that we might show him some of our signs, for he is the one who heareth and seeth." Remember, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was constructed about 100 years after this was revealed in the Quran. But the Quran clearly tells us that Muhammad took a night journey to a place known as Al-Aqsa, which means the farthest. If Jerusalem was intended, then it would have said Al-Quds, because this was the name of Jerusalem at the time, the holy. But it says Al-Aqsa, the farthest. Now next, Al-Bukhari adds, and it's narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, "Do not set out on a journey except for 3 mosques, Masjid al-Haram, or the mosque of the Prophet, Allah's apostle, or Al-Aqsa." Again, note that in the above hadith, Muhammad is speaking of a place called Al-Aqsa almost a century before the mosque was built in Jerusalem. So during Muhammad's lifetime, there must have been another place also called Al-Aqsa. Bukhari also tells us, and Abu Dhar narrates this, "I said, O Allah's apostle, which mosque was built first on the surface of the earth?" And he said, Masjid al-Haram. I asked, which was built next? And he said, the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. And I said, what was the period of construction between the two? And he said, 40 years. And he added, whenever you pray at prayer time, perform the prayer there, for it is the best thing to do. Now, there are several strange things about this hadith. Abraham was supposed to have laid the foundation stones for the first Masjid al-Haram. So how was Al-Aqsa built 40 years later? Remember, during Abraham's time, there was no mosque in Jerusalem, and indeed there was no city in Jerusalem. It was just a mountaintop. Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem was built 90 years after the Hijrah, and we have a clear description by Al-Tabari and others of how it was built and where it was built and some of the discussion that went on. Now, in Kitab al-Tarikh, al-Maghazi, an early Muslim historian and biographer, this is al-Waqidi writing, and he describes Muhammad's stay in the village of Jirana, a few miles outside of Masjid al-Haram. And he writes, the Prophet arrived in Jirana on Thursday and remained 13 nights. Then he departed Jirana after praying at Al-Aqsa Mosque, located on the banks of the riverbed. The Prophet used to pray there whenever he came to Jirana. We'll go back to this in a few moments, but now another historian, Azraqi, he describes a discussion between 2 men named Muhammad bin Tariq and Mujahid. Muhammad says, Mujahid and I agree on Jirana because he informed me the Prophet used to pray at Al-Aqsa, located on the banks of the riverbed or the wadi. The other nearby mosque, the Al-Adna Mosque, was built by a man from the Quraysh tribe. Remember, Al-Aqsa in Arabic means the farthest, and Al-Adna means the lowest, or maybe the nearest, but the lowest is what it is interpreted. And so these two mosques are simply named by their location. There's the lowest, Al-Adna, and then there's the farther one that's out, which is Al-Aqsa. Another early historian, Ibn Ishaq al-Faqihi, notes that Muslims who wanted to perform the Umrah, that's the minor pilgrimage, would purify first themselves at the neighboring villages of Tanim and Jirana. The Al-Adna Mosque was in Taman, and it was significant because Muhammad's wife Aisha had purified herself there, and the Prophet himself had prayed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jirana. This leads us to expect that Jirana also had a good source of water, especially as it was located on the banks of a wadi. Now, Hadith historian Abu Ali recorded that Salma heard Muhammad say, whoever prepares for the Umrah by purifying himself in the Al-Aqsa Mosque before he goes to the Haram area will have his sins forgiven before he even commits them. This leads us to expect that Jirana was just outside the forbidden area, where one could wash themselves. Now, all the above sources indicate that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, referred to by Muhammad in the Quran, that's in Surah 17, was the mosque in Jirana, a village just outside of Masjid al-Haram. The famous mosque today, known as Al-Aqsa, is in Jerusalem, and it was built 90 years after the Hijrah, after Islam began. So it cannot be the Al-Aqsa Mosque referred to by these historians. I would like to suggest a place in Petra that fits all of these descriptions. Today, it's covered over by buildings, but in ancient times, this place was 8 kilometers from the heart of Petra. So it was outside of Masjid al-Haram. Pilgrims who wanted to enter the forbidden area would have stopped here first to cleanse themselves. Indeed, almost everyone entering the area of Wadi Musa outside of Petra drives past an artesian well located at the edge of the wadi, just as it was described. Today, this well is known as the Moses Spring, and tour guides gleefully connect the story with Moses hitting the rock and the water coming out. I don't think that's where it took place, but if this is the Al-Aqsa, then Al-Adna would be lower down from this point. And sure enough, if you follow the pilgrim path, it winds around and goes down, and there is an area with water. This would have been the place where Aisha, Muhammad's wife, purified herself. There is this place which we could know it as Al-Adna, but there's no name on it today. But as pilgrims go down this path, past the Moses Spring, farther down, some water ebbs. You can see it here on the satellite photo. There's this green area, and the road winds around and goes right through it as it is going down to the entrance of Masjid al-Haram. So, it's just like the ancient writers would have described. There's 2 places of washing outside the Haram area. Al-Aqsa is first on the riverbank. Al-Adna is second. So the men would wash in Al-Aqsa like Muhammad did. The women would wash in Al-Adna like Aisha did before they enter into the pilgrim area. So how did the name Al-Aqsa get connected to the mosque in Jerusalem? First, it's not uncommon for places to have the same name, especially a common name such as the far or the near. The building of the mosque in Jerusalem in 90 after the Hijrah, they would have faced an issue of what to name this mosque. The Islamic holy city was known as Haram, Masjid al-Haram. So the city of Jerusalem at that time, and it's called Al-Quds as it is today, the Holy. So imagine if you call this new mosque the Holy Mosque, Al-Quds Mosque. It might overshadow the name used for their sacred city. So they wouldn't want to call it Al-Quds because it seems to be a higher, more important name. Now remember, at this time, as far as the Muslim armies were going, they had come here. So indeed it was the farthest mosque. And so maybe casually the workers just called it that. And it was a safe name and a respectable name, and eventually it would have been called that. Now, many years later, after the original Masjid al-Haram in Petra was forgotten, and the original location of Al-Aqsa in Jirana outside of Petra was forgotten, the Abbasid writers would tell the story of Muhammad traveling to Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And all everyone could ever remember was that it was in Jerusalem, because the one in Petra was forgotten. So to them, it seemed like a miracle that Muhammad had traveled so far at night. Now, let's review the dates for a few minutes, just so we get the dates in order. Put it in context. First, the Black Rock was moved to Mecca in Saudi Arabia around 70 after the Hijrah. Then, according to an inscription near Mecca, Masjid al-Haram was built in Mecca in 78 after the Hijrah. This is during the reign of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. In the year 89, the well Zamzam in the original Haram area at Petra was lost. It's then relocated in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. That's in Al-Tabri. This is during the reign of Al-Walid I. And also during Al-Walid's reign, Hajjaj starts to build his between mosques. It was the very next year, during the reign of Al-Walid, that Al-Aqsa was built. And now that the rock was relocated, and a few years later, Masjid al-Haram was relocated, and a few years later, Zamzam was located, and now I don't think there was any hesitation in relocating Al-Aqsa, especially to such a prestigious location as that great rock in Jerusalem. And so the early records tell us that the original Aqsa was described as a place of washing and cleansing located on the edge of a wadi outside the sacred area. But we find, we can find that in Petra, but we don't find it in Jerusalem. We can also find Al-Adna, the place of washing. It fits the Petra story. But today the Al-Aqsa Mosque is in Jerusalem, built on the bald, hard rock at the top of a mountain. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another question and answer video.